Hello, once again. Our interview today is with Steve Walther, the author of Sacred Blisters, a pilgrim's look at the history, mystery, and life lessons learned on El Camino de Santiago. I'm sure there's supposed to be an accent used for that I'm just not a master of, but I'm sure the story is going to be good too. I've been talking to Steve before we hit record. He's got some great energy, so let me share it with you. Steve, welcome to the show.
Hello. Thank you, Michael. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you so much for indulging me on talking about me.
Yes, that's what it's all about. So
Yeah.
tell us, what is El Camino de Santiago?
El Camino de Santiago is a ancient path that leads from all over Europe. Think of it as a hub where El Camino de Santiago is a town. Well, Santiago de Compostela is a town in northwest Spain, and there are trails that come from all over Europe since the Middle Ages to this one spot. And the prefaces of this is why that came to be. And what happened is one of Jesus's 12 apostles, after the big guy got hung up on the cross, the 12 apostles got together, and I don't know if they drew straws to see who went where, but St. James ended up going to the Iberian Peninsula, and he got on a boat, went to Iberian Peninsula, walked all around for several years, and had limited success, but a little bit of success. But he really had most success in this one part of Spain, today's Spain, called Galicia. And after several years, he decided he needed to go back and see what the other boys were doing back in Jerusalem. So he gets on a boat and goes back. And when he gets there, the Romans say, "There he is. He's one of those Christian guys," and they rounded him up and cut his head off. And his disciples then kind of wrapped up his body, took it back to Spain, and hid it. And they hid it on the side of this mountain in the countryside of Galicia, and built kind of a mausoleum there. And it was kind of a secret where it was. And after generations, it was kind of forgotten. And then one day in the 8th century, I think, this one guy was out wandering around and came across this old building out in the middle of nowhere, and the story and the lore is, there were stars and there were things that brought him there, and so he ends up at this place and gets the door open, and there's a box there with some Aramaic writing, and calls the church in to show him what he found, and they said, "Oh my gosh, this is St. James," and in Spanish, Santiago means St. James. So Santiago de Compostela, Santiago de Compostela means a field of stars. And so it's St. James under a field of stars. And then El Camino. So El Camino, direct translation means the way, like the pathway. But early Christianhood, the way, they used to refer to Christianity as the way forward, the way to follow the way. So El Camino de Santiago kind of has two meanings. One is the way of Jesus, and the other is the way of the path itself. So when they found it, people started coming from all over Europe to this one spot. So when you hear people talk about El Camino de Santiago, it's not one path. There's actually 50,000 miles of trails that come from all over Europe to this one spot. So the other interesting thing is, it started off as a very Christian pilgrimage, but today people are making it from all over the world, from all different religions and all different walks of life and everything. And I don't know what the percentage is, but I would say less than 50% of the people probably have any tie to a religion one way or the other when they're doing it. It's more of a self-reflective. It's more of an adventure, a journey, maybe they have a change at home, family, something happening, or, some people, it's interesting. Some people, they say that they go for a physical challenge and they're not really ready for the mental part of it when they come back. So it's in a nutshell, that's kind of the Camino and how it came about. But so there isn't one way. There's kind of your way, how you want to do it. So the Camino that you pick can be based on your, how far you can walk. Number one, probably the most important, but two is how long do you have? So I have a really good friend that finished it yesterday or the day before. When I say finished it, he arrived in Santiago, and he started 35 days ago or so. He started on the most traditional route's called the Camino Francés, and it starts on the French side of the Pyrenees. You walk over the Pyrenees and all the way across northern Spain to this one spot, and it's still over 500 miles. It takes about 35 days, and he just finished yesterday. And so again, that's an example. So for him, his Camino was, 35 days, and it could be anywhere from 35 days to 5 days. Whatever fits your calendar and your ability.
So how did you get into studying this, and what's it mean for you?
Well, it's kind of a funny story. I don't know how far I want to go back. I graduated from college and had a job that I didn't particularly like. And I went to work one day, and the fellow that owned the business was very upset over something that had happened the day before, which I wasn't even there. And he started yelling at me about something. And that morning on the way to work, I checked the mail and I had a postcard. And it was from a friend of mine that had went to Spain on an exchange program and never came home. He stayed. And the postcard read, and quote, I still have it. It read, "Dude, I live in this 500-year-old building. Rent's cheap, drinks are cheap, food's cheap." He said, "Women come and cook and clean for me. It's natural and correct. When are you coming?" Little today in today's society, you get in trouble saying that, but it was in fun and in joke. I read the postcard, laughed, and it said, "When are you coming?" And it had a phone number. Put the postcard in my pocket, and I went to work and got yelled at immediately by this guy that I was talking about. And I said, "Wait just a second." And I walked downstairs, and from his phone, I called the number on the postcard. And I said, "Hey, I got your postcard." And we both laughed. And I said, "Are you serious about me coming?" And he said, "Yes." And this is in 1991 and 91 or 92. And he said, "Yeah, in fact, I just got a new apartment. I need a roommate." He said, "I'll be there in 2 weeks." And I sold everything I owned, which for a 23-year-old, I was pretty loaded. I had a couple of fish tanks, a motorcycle, and a Jeep. Ooh. So I sold and a futon. So I sold all that stuff, that my riches, and I moved to Spain. And I moved to a town called Granada, which is in far southern Spain. And to take this really long story and shorten it up a little bit, one of my roommates there his family was from Galicia, and we went up to visit his family, and we walked out on the square in front of the big cathedral, and there were kind of backpackers coming through, and there was real kind of some weird juju, some weird energy. And I said, "What the heck is going on here?" And he says, "Well, they're pilgrims." I said, "Pilgrims, like Thanksgiving turkey eating pilgrims?" My American small town naive side had no idea what the heck he was talking about. And he says, "No, they're walking the Camino." So, this was before the internet. I found some books, I started reading out, and I said, "Someday I'm going to do this." Fast forward a few years later, I met and married a Spanish lady. We lived in Spain for several years. And I kept telling her and I went up and visited up there. And I said, "I'm going to come back and I'm going to walk this." And as time went on, I started getting older, having kids and different things. And all of a sudden, if I don't do this now, I'm never going to do it. So I kind of drew a line in the sand and said, "I'm going to do my first one. If I don't do it by the time I'm 50, I'll never do it." So I did my first Camino when I was 49. And I have my fifth one scheduled this coming November. And wow. And if it was up to me, I would walk the Camino in perpetuity. It's more than, people say, "Well, oh, you're going on another hike." Well, yes, you're out walking, but it's not a hike. Other people say, "You live in Idaho. Why are you going all the way to Europe to hike? You have all kinds. We live on the west side of the Rockies. We have, a tremendous outdoor wildlife, everything here." It's more than the nature part of it. It's everything. It's the history, the mystery, I mentioned before the juju. There is
Mm-hmm.
of feeling you get there. And the people you meet, everybody's feeling it, and we're all kind of connected.
Hmm.
And you walk, and you can walk. It's entirely, everybody does it their own way. And when you walk, you can walk all by yourself. I So far I've done all of them by myself. I went once with my daughter. Next year I'm going to go with both of my kids. We're going to do it together. But you know, I always start off by myself, and I end up coming into Santiago with my Camino family, with the whole group of folks that become lifelong friends, and more than friends. We have that time spent together that is like nothing else. You have all day long walking, and I don't know, Michael, are you a walker?
Not a huge walker, but I think I know what you're talking about. That sense of that quiet time together. That's the difference
Right.
between in-person events and virtual events is the same thing. In a
Yep.
virtual event, you're in, the event's done, you're out. Whereas an in-person event, you've got that time after it's over when you're hanging out in the lobby or the bar afterwards, or the
Right.
after the game when you're standing in the parking lot for an hour talking, and
Right.
those
But
unprogrammed times, and so I can
yeah,
certainly understand what you're saying, that they're talking about days of
yes,
programmed time to just explore each other's lives and stories. And
yeah.
so tell me a little bit about the book and what's in
Oh
there.
yeah.
It's about like those stories and
So
your experience there.
the book is, I didn't want to write a history book because I'm not a historian, and so it's a little bit about the history, but it's more written like from the standpoint of, hey, it all started with this dude walking around, and it's not, it dives a little bit into the religious aspect of it, but not, quoting Bible verse and all that, because that's not my thing either, necessarily from that focal point. It's more about, here's the history of it, but every other chapter oscillates between little stories about people I met and life lessons learned from that. And I learned so many amazing things about myself, about life, about everything from the people I meet and the experiences that happen. I've met, I met people that all different walks of life from all over. Like, as an example, this last time I walked with a real character from Taiwan. I walked with a guy from Portugal. I walked with a guy from Spain. I walked with a 70-year-old lady from Brazil. I walked with another guy from Hong Kong, and a guy from Amsterdam, and I'm forgetting one from a lady from Denmark. So that was kind of our group. I mean, a very eclectic. Ages ranged from late 20s to 70, and we all kind of, different perspectives, different talking at different points. We all, we'd be walking, with, a little bit with one person and a little bit with another person, then all of us, and then, but you stop and you walk, and then you might stop and have a glass of wine. You might stop and have a cup of coffee, or you might stop, and the wine and the coffee are amazing. The food is fantastic. The countryside, you walk through a village, and then you're on the side of a mountain, and then you go over the mountain, and then you're walking through a farm, and then you're on the side of a freeway, and then you walk through a big city, and then you walk through the country, and then you walk on a cobblestone street. So it's, every day is different. And the other thing too is, like, when it's hot, it's hot for everybody. It's not like, whoa, with me it's hot. It's like we're all kind of in it together.
Yeah.
When it's cold and raining, it's not just raining on him or her. It's raining on all of us. So we're all kind of in it together. And you come to a town, and you break bread together, and you tell stories, and you get to know each other. And it just you're creating memories. But more than that, I think the self-reflection, the everything that happens. But the book is kind of little life lessons I learned. I'll give you one story. On my first Camino, when you get to Santiago, you can extend it 3 or 4 days and walk over to a place called Finisterre, which before Columbus, Finisterre in Latin means end of the earth. Finisterre, and before Columbus, they used to think if you kept going past, then you'd fall off the edge of the world. And so it's like the westernmost point in Europe, and it's a little point up there on where the land sticks out. And so you can, and that's where, when they brought his body back from the Holy Lands, Santiago's, that's where they came inland right there. And so it's kind of an important spot from that as well. So I was on my way walking out there, and I'd read in a guidebook that said, don't pack all this extra weight because you're carrying your stuff on your back. It said your phone has a nice flashlight on it. So if you leave, when you leave early in the morning in the dark, you don't need a flashlight, you just use your phone, which sounds reasonable, right? Well, it was pouring rain this one particular morning, so much so that my finger wouldn't work on the screen. And then I thought I was going to fry my phone from being in the downpour of a rain. I think there were goldfish swimming in my jacket pocket. It was so wet. So I didn't have a flashlight. It's pouring down rain. It was so dark. I was in a forest. I couldn't see out in front of me. And I'm walking down this trail by feel like this. And I got to a point in the trail where the trail teed. And they have markers there that tell you which way to go along the way, so you know the path. And it was so dark I could see the marker, but I couldn't tell which way the arrow went on the marker. So I'm reaching, the water's like gushing along the side of the trail there, and I got to one knee and I'm reaching up to feel the arrow to see if it goes right or left. And out of the darkness behind me, I hear a voice that says, "What in the hell are you doing?" And I turned around, and there was a Korean guy, Jawan, and he had a parka on, a rain jacket parka, a rain jacket hood. He had a headlamp on, and he'd been following me, and he thought I was some drunk guy from the night before walking down the trail like this. And I couldn't see his light, but he watched me, and I explained to him my predicament with not having any light walking out in the darkness. And he kind of shrugged his shoulders and rolled his eyes at some stupid American not having a light working in the dark in a rainstorm. But we got to talking the next day, and I said, I know you started in Saint Jean Pied de Port in France, and I know you've been walking for, at that point he'd already been walking 35 days or more. I said, tell me something that you learned along the way. And he said, he was 34, 35 years old. He'd never been outside of Korea before. He'd never been on an airplane before. He spoke Korean, obviously, and a little bit of English, but he didn't speak Spanish, or he didn't speak any French, which is very common. Not a lot of people speak Spanish and French. Not everybody does. Mm-hmm. But he said, when I got to Paris, first time I'd ever been outside of Korea, I was lost. I didn't know how to talk to anyone. I was alone. I finally figured out how to take a train all the way down to where you start the Camino, and I didn't know how you're supposed to find albergues, are the hostels where you stay, where the pilgrims stay. He said, I didn't know how to find one. I didn't know what to do. He said, I finally figured it out, and I walked over that first mountain over the Pyrenees, and I couldn't talk to anybody. I was alone. I was miserable. It was terrible. I hated it. And as I'm coming down the other side, he said, I made a conscious effort that the first time I saw a town with a taxi, I was going to take it back and go home. And right then, this other 70-something-year-old Korean man came walking into where he was. And they got to talking, and he said, well, hi, how, they're speaking in Korean. And he says, how's your journey going? And the old man said, I'm 70-something years old. I've never been on an airplane before. I've never left Korea before. I don't speak any English. I don't speak any Spanish. I don't speak any French. He didn't even speak English. And he said, but the people are so nice and helpful and wonderful. He said, everyone I meet is so nice. He said, the views are incredible. Can you believe this? He said, we're out walking. We just crossed the Pyrenees. He said, it is so amazing. Life is incredible. And he said, I'm having the best time of my life. And Jawan he stopped, and he turned to me and he says, I learned a very valuable lesson there. He said, whenever you're struggling, there's always people with far less succeeding with far less. And it basically said, quit your bitching and keep going. And he said, I never stopped walking. And in fact, I walked with him for a day and a half, and he was a good walker. And he said, I got it down. He says, I met all kinds of people. I've had a wonderful adventure. But those are the kind of life lessons you learn along the way where, and I carry that with me all the time, is anytime you get down about something, you think back that, it really wasn't that big of a deal. And I made through it okay. And, those are the kind of stories that are in the book about stuff like that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yep. So one of the notes you had here mentions the importance of preparation and the curse of over preparation. I'm curious about that.
There is a wonderful Australian guy that has a podcast named Dan Mullins about the Camino, and he calls people that over prepare spreadsheet pilgrims. And I, unfortunately, with my personality, the way I am, I do plan a little bit, probably over plan on I'm going to be here and I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. But one of the things I've learned in doing several of them is, obviously spontaneity is fantastic, and you have to have some sort of outline or you're not going to make it. But one of the things that you come back with the Camino is you really don't need that much stuff, not only in your backpack, but as an example for going back home and learning to declutter your life is, what do you really need? I'm going to spend 30-35 days on the French route or one of your other routes, 10, 15, 20, 30, whatever your thing is. I'm going to be able to do it with my backpack, with a pair of shorts, maybe a pair of long pants, a couple shirts, a jacket, maybe a blanket and some toiletries and some socks and underwear. That's all I have.
Yeah.
What do we really need? And to get by and you're doing this incredible adventure with very, very little. And it's funny, you see people, you get there, they have these giant backpacks and way too much. And I heard a story once where they saw somebody walking with a fold-up chair on the back of their backpack, which I suspect that chair probably didn't make it the whole way. But I've always thought it would be really cool to open up a shop on day 1 or 2 of most of the trails to buy people stuff that they want to get rid of, or just get it, or to pick it up along the trail and then go back and sell it at the start of the trail. But it's a real, as far as learning about how to prepare for everything in life, is you really don't need a whole lot more than, first off, the want to, and the second is, a commitment to do it. And all the other stuff is extra baggage, literally and figuratively, that you don't need. Another quick story is, I met this wonderful woman through the Camino universe, and she is over 70 years old. She is this 90-pound lady. She's from Northern California, and she has done many, many, many Caminos. She will walk 1,400 miles this summer doing several Caminos. She's just this tiny little older lady, and she dyes her hair blue when she's there, and she's just, everybody knows her name is Dr. Gigi. And Gigi's this wonderful lady. And she was telling the story about how she carries a backpack like this big that weighs nothing, like just a few pounds. And she says she carries like what she's wearing, a long t-shirt, some rain stuff, and some food, and that's it. And I said, well, how do you get by with that? And she says, when I get to the albergue, the hostel, she says, I put my bag on the bed and I go into the showers, and I have a t-shirt. I bring the t-shirt and set it out. I get right into the shower with all my clothes. I wash them with them on, wring them out, hang them up to dry, and then I put the t-shirt on. And I said, so Gigi, you then walk around the albergue with just wearing a t-shirt with all those people around? And she said, oh, honey, she said, if they want to look at me naked, they have more problems than I do. So it's kind of, you don't really need that much stuff. And and she I'm friends with her on Facebook, and she's there right now, and I just love following her, watching her, meeting these people, and the smile, the permagrin she has, walking around doing her thing. And she's 70 years old. Yeah,
makes sense. And so is there food in the hostels, or where do you find the
great question? So it depends on the route. Every day you kind of have to read the guidebook and see what's in the next day. So you might have to pack some French bread and some cold cuts and some fruit in your bag and bring that with you. But most of the routes, every day along the way, there's restaurants along the way. And the restaurants so in Spain, they eat their big meal of the day, like at 2 or 3 in the afternoon. Mm-hmm. So you go to a place and they have what they call el menú del día, or the menu of the day, or the pilgrim's meal. And it's usually anywhere from about $5 to $15, like a 3 or 4 or 5 course meal. That's amazing. I'll tell you, this is a great story, and I'm glad you asked that question. Is My trip before I did the Portuguese route from Porto, Portugal up, actually it was 2 trips ago. And I walked with this Portuguese guy who was married to a Polish lady, and they lived in Saudi Arabia. Talk about conversations you might have in that dynamic. And there was a German guy with us and a lady from Mexico. And we walked into this place to have the big meal at the end of the day, or the late middle of the day. And the Polish lady said, I wish I could do a Polish accent, but she said, "None of you guys sit with me. I'm going to sit over here." So I thought maybe her husband, she got in trouble or something was going on, or she got mad at us. I don't know. But she went over and sat by herself, and we all sat at this other table. So when you're doing the menu of the day, it usually comes with wine or water, and it comes with like a soup or salad, main course, a meat, a vegetable, and then it comes with a dessert and a cup of coffee. And it might be $7-8. And it's, it might be the main course might be chicken and some rice, or it might be French fries and a steak, or it can be a whole bunch of different things. But if you're by yourself, they'll bring you a bottle of wine in 1 glass. If you sit with 4 people, they'll bring you a bottle of wine in 4 glasses. So she went and sat at her table, got 1 glass and 1 bottle of wine. And then and they brought us, 4 glasses and 1 bottle of wine. And when she got her bottle and her glass, then she came over and joined us. But so there's little tricks you can learn along the way. Nice. But yeah, so to answer your question, some of the albergues will serve like a kind of a communal dinner at night. Some of them will have a kitchen where people can go together and go into a little market and buy some food and come back and cook it together. Some of them offer a food where you all sit at the same table, and they might make. Usually it's something like a stew or something, but they'll make it for everybody, and then you might have to pay. A lot of them are you make some of them are you give what you want. Other ones, okay, it's an extra $5 for dinner or $10 for dinner, whatever that is. So it depends on where you stay. Now the albergues are basically they're like hostels for pilgrims, and you have to be a pilgrim to stay there. You get a credential when you start.
Yeah.
And some of them are very nice, and some of them are giant rooms with a bunch of bunk beds in it. Some part of that's the adventure. When you're a lot younger, it's a lot better than when you're older. And I met an English lady once that she said the best thing. She said, I told her where I'd stayed the night before. She said, "Oh, albergue." She says, "They smell of pain and regret." and I like albergues for the experience, and the purist, the pilgrim purist will want to shoot lightning at me for saying this, but I like to stay. They have rural houses. They call them casas rurales, or they have bed and breakfasts or small hotels in some of these places where you can stay there, which sometimes is also really quaint. And sometimes you meet the local farm family, or you meet somebody. I prefer those in my own room, my own shower. I get back and, you walked all day. I like to take my shoes off, lay there in my underwear for a few minutes, collect myself, take a shower, and then go back out and have dinner or meet with everybody. But when you're in the albergue, you're on a bunk bed with a room full of people. And if one person's snoring, everybody hears them snoring. And if 5 people are snoring, I don't get a wink of sleep. So, and then people leave early or late, and, it's part of the experience. And I think everyone should stay in some albergues along the way. I like to break it up with a little me time along the way too.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad you shared that, because my first thought here was like the Appalachian Trail, where it's basically you're in the wilderness for days and days, but this isn't the wilderness. There's places you're staying. There's way stations along the route. Yep. It sounds like a very civilized journey. That there's, it's not like the Appalachian Trail where you have to bring all your food, all your supplies, cooking supplies, tents, the whole thing. This is more of you are walking from one supplied place to another supplied place, and it's more about the journey than the hike and the physical challenge and challenging the mountain. It's more about challenging yourself more than
exactly. And
surviving the trail.
Now, there are aspects of certain routes that are very arduous and very difficult and very you climb over some good mountains, but and there are places where people do stay in tents, and they do that, but it's very rare. I met a guy that walked all the way from Germany and he walked and camp. He had the biggest backpack I've ever seen, but he camped along the way and would stay in albergues and camp depending on what was available. And so you can do it, but I would say 99% of people don't. There are people that do it on horseback. There are people that do it on bicycles. I actually met a guy. I didn't meet him. I saw him that did it with. He had a donkey with all his stuff, and he'd come all the way from Northern Europe somewhere. There's a lady, a young Spanish lady. When I say young, as we get older, young people becomes relative, but she literally was pretty young. I think she was early 20s, 20-ish, by herself, a Spanish young lady. She is remarkable. Can't think of her name right this very second, but she walked from Santiago to the Holy Lands backwards. She did that, and she left. I think she left in the early summer or spring, and got to. She walked into Jerusalem or Bethlehem. She walked into Bethlehem, I think, on Christmas Day. Either Jerusalem or Bethlehem, I can't remember, but by herself. Backwards. So she walked all the way up Spain, across southern France, down Italy. Then she took a ferry over to Greece or Turkey, and then she walked through Syria, and then I'm not sure what countries between Syria and Israel, but I think Syria to Israel, but she walked by herself that whole way. Wow. And she did like podcast interviews along the way back, and the people would broadcast them here so you could follow her journey, and it was amazing.
Wow. Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, and as I'm hearing, I'm thinking about books like Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance.
Yeah,
it's the story of a physical journey that is also the story of a inward journey. But this is that in real life, and the concept's always been fascinating. I'm an American. So the idea of a road trip and journey. I've driven to Los Angeles. From Connecticut. I've driven to Florida, Wisconsin. But road trip's not quite the same because you're basically in the car. You've got your own space, your own media, your own environment. Where it sounds like on this trip, you're not listening to podcasts. You're talking to people around you. You're listening to birds and trees and animals and wind and your actual environment.
Yep. And you some people walk entirely by themselves the whole time. They're there for that mental headspace that they just want to, maybe they're dealing with something back home, or, maybe they want to do it that way. Other people ebb and flow with themselves and with other people. And the great thing too is you might see someone on the first day and walk with them and then not see them for 4 or 5 days or for 10 days or 15 days. So it's a little bit different. This year I'll be doing my 5th one, and the technology's evolved quite a bit. So now everybody exchanges, when you meet them, their WhatsApp number, so you can say like, "Hey Joe, where are you? I just came into this town," or don't eat at that place, or oh, you can't miss the sangria at this place. So you kind of have that connection that you didn't used to have. It used to be you'd just be looking in the guidebook, the whole way, which there's pros and cons of both.
Yeah.
But the nature part of it is you're out in the elements. You're not on the I'm a West Coast guy, so we have the Pacific Crest Trail versus the Appalachian Trail. So you don't have the pure outback aspect of being away from civilization. But so you're if you do have an emergency, you're never really that far away from help. And here's the other thing too is people are the best versions of themselves when they're there. And when people need help, everybody helps. I've seen people that had really bad foot issues, health issues along the way, and someone else carries their backpack too, to get them to where they need to go. And there's a sense of camaraderie, and there's a sense of a collective we as opposed to me.
Yeah.
And I think that's a valuable lesson that every pilgrim takes home with them. You see things through a little bit of a different light. I'm a backpacker. I love to backpack. I love to camp. I love to do all that stuff. But it's different than that because you are there's a together. Yeah. Even though you could be all by yourself, but there's still a together. But then you factor in, you're walking on a trail that, first off, 2020 years ago, the first guy who started walking around doing this. And then however many years since they found his body, people have been walking on these same trails. And the reason there's so many trails is because it's where they came up, where they originally were coming back. And one of the main differences is back then they walked all the way there and then they had to turn around and walk back. We get on an airplane and fly home, but they also, didn't have Gore-Tex and all that stuff. So their journey was much, much difficult. And then the other part of the history, that same thing was because this was such an important pilgrimage with regards to the church back then. The Knights Templar that we all know from, the movies, I'm forgetting the big movie with Tom Hanks. And all the Knights Templar movies and all that stuff. Well, the Knights Templar really started out of protecting the pilgrims on the Camino.
Oh, and really?
Then they started going, and then they were, either going or coming from the Holy Lands, during the Crusades. So along the Camino, there are all of these Knights Templar churches that were kind of like guard stations for protecting the pilgrims. So if you were a bandit or something and you stole money from someone, basically like the Texas Ranger version of today or the Old West, they would go out after these guys and kind of protect the pilgrims along the way. So that history, that part of that, and there's all kinds of symbology along the way, like different symbols and different things that go back to the Knights Templar. And so that whole aspect of it is super cool as well. And when you're walking, you feel all that. And the people that have been walking, the millions and millions of steps that have been on that same trail, whether you're out in the field or you're out in the forest or you're on a cobblestone street, wherever you are, you're following an ancient path that is, and they say that those same paths were before Santiago, going back to the Celts, before, the Celts were there in Galicia before that, and there's trails all over way back, before Christ, way back 1,000 years before that. So these trails they've been there for a couple of days.
Yeah. Well,
and
that's fascinating because, for us Americans, 200 years seems like old. And
right.
In Europe, it sounds like this tradition of having all the stopovers and whatnot, that goes back more than 200 years, let alone.
Well, you said 200 years. Out west, 80 years is pretty old.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So feeling something that old, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 years old, must be very powerful.
It is, and again, from the religious component of it, remembering how it all got started is, one of the guys that walked with Christ, whether you believe or whether, like the Dr. Gigi, who I mentioned before, she's Jewish, and she's Jewish, and she has a Star of David on her backpack, and she stays kosher. And being in Spain, eating no pork and eating kosher is very difficult, but she does it, and she's wonderful. So I mean, I've walked with Muslims, I've walked with Jews, I've walked with what am I forgetting here? Hindus, not very many Hindus, but a couple. So it's not all just Christianity now. But with that said, is when you get to the end, can you see? This is the church at the end where Santiago is buried. And when you go in there, you can go see the box where his remains are. And it's this really silver and gold encrusted box that's kind of below the altar down below, and you can walk right up to it, and you're 3-4 feet from it. So you're standing right next to a guy that walked with Jesus.
Wow.
Whether you believe what part of the story or not, that's still pretty powerful that he is one of the guys that did it, and he's right there. And from a historical perspective, I think that's pretty powerful. And the other neat thing too is at the end they have a pilgrim's mass. So everybody, no matter again what denomination, where they're from, the whole thing, everybody goes and does the pilgrim mass at the end, where it's kind of like a big, you're there, you did it, and they kind of when you register, you get a certificate that you did the walk. Not everyone goes and gets it, but the majority of people do. During the mass at the end, they read off. They say, "Well, we have 27 people from France, and we have 200 from England, and 25 from the United States," and they tell where everybody came from, how many pilgrims they had that day.
Oh, yeah, and it sounds like one of those places where you sort of see a convergence of faith. That faith, whatever your faith is, That's where you start to see those overlapping lines that there's a lot in common among them.
Yep.
That you're not like, I'm a Christian pilgrim and you're a Muslim pilgrim,
Yep.
and we're doing different things.
Yep.
You discover you're walking the same road, both physically and metaphorically.
Yeah. Now, I will say, there are some Camino purists that say you have to do it this way, and you have to walk this way, and you have to carry in this many, baloney. I think you do what's best for you, in the spirit of what you're meaning, what's supposed to be happening. But everyone do their own Camino the way that works for them, and I think it's a wonderful thing, and really, and especially not just especially today, but the way people are so fragmented today, that it is a wonderful thing to come together. And the best part of all is, however long you choose to walk, whether it be 5 days or 100 days, is, you're not watching the news every day. And it's amazing how the sun shines a little brighter and the birds chirp a little louder when you're not listening to all that negativeness all day long.
Yeah, and it reminds you of what we all have in common. And I mean, even just getting out and talking to your neighbors does that. So I can imagine being out for 5, 10, 20 days away from all that, and connecting with people, even if you are checking in on the news every night because you can't stop yourself. It's still, once you get back out there, you're reminded of, this is what people are like. They care about their families and their health, and finding peace and understanding themselves, and all the rest is noise.
We all love our families. We want the best for our families. We want to be loved. We want to be we all, no matter what our outsides look like, on the inside we're all the same, and we all want the same things. And you really quickly learn that our stories, some people have different zeros behind their numbers. You don't talk numbers there. You don't get into that too much. And sometimes the most unassuming people you find out later. I'll tell you one story. In case she listens to this, I don't want to embarrass her, so I won't use her name, but I walked with this amazing woman from Mexico. And she had been working as a nanny in Ireland. And I said, why did you go to Ireland to be a nanny? She said, well, I want to learn English. And I said, you went to Ireland to learn English? And she said, I know how stupid that is now, how silly that is now. She said, but she'd been there for so many years and her visa was running out, so she had to go back home. So before she left, she wanted to do the Camino. So, and so as an American, I assume that she was probably, it was a job working as a nanny and a way for her to travel to Europe, that she may not financially be able to do it. And that's what I assumed, right? And whether that's probably an unfair assumption, but at the same token, not unreasonable, right? And one day we were talking, and again, there was a German guy with us, and the Polish lady, and the Portuguese guy, and we were all talking about back when we were in college and where we lived when we were in college, and they lived in the dorms and they lived in an apartment, and it came back to this young Mexican. Well, I say young Mexican lady, she was, I think, close to 40. She said, I lived in the dorms when I was in college. And I said, we'll just call her Maria, because I don't want to use her name. She doesn't get mad at me or send me bad Facebook things. Wonderful, wonderful lady. I love her to death. She said, I said, what did you study, Maria? And she said, molecular biology. And I said, what were you doing before you were a nanny in Ireland? She said, I was a pharmaceutical rep in Mexico City. And we're all like, here I'm thinking that she's some poor Mexican village girl from somewhere. And she's probably made more money than all of us back before she decided to go on this trip to be a nanny, to learn English and to discover herself and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so it was an important life lesson from that standpoint of, I assumed this, and it was way over here.
Mm-hmm.
That didn't change anything in how awesome she was, but it was, that was me projecting. And so you really learn a lot about, to not judge, the old judge a book by its cover.
Absolutely. Well, I think we're used to being able to look up people's Facebook pages, their bios, their LinkedIn pages, so there's all this information we can get on people, all this metadata that we can get people when we connect with them. And there's no metadata when you're out there on the trail. There's just their face and their stuff. And I assume everyone looks a little bit grungy and a little bit dirty when they're out there.
Right. We all look like we just came out of a week-long college rager, But again, too, and we're wearing this. It's not like you have to get dressed up to go out, too, because you only have what you have in your backpack.
Yep.
So by the second day, they've seen everything I have.
Yeah. I've got a brown T-shirt.
Yeah.
And a gray T-shirt.
Exactly. That's all.
Wardrobe.
Yeah, that's the whole thing. And so, but that's the wonderful thing about it too, is you're not caught up in all the things that really aren't that important.
Yeah, no, that sounds fascinating. Well, so this has been a fascinating conversation. That's what
you.
I love about doing these interviews. I get to learn all kinds of unique and interesting things. I had not heard of El Camino before you told me about it, and now I have. Now I definitely want to, take another look at the book. And anyone listening should also check out the book, which is called Sacred Blisters, a pilgrim's look at the history, mystery, and life lessons learned on El Camino de Santiago. How'd I do on the accent there?
You did perfect.
All right. Nice. Author approved. And of
right.
course, you can find that. There's links down below wherever you're watching and listening to this, or you can find it on Amazon or at writersrepublic.com. So, Steve, thank you so much for sharing the story. This has been great.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Michael. I appreciate it. And I hope this left you with a desire to maybe go take your first step on the Camino someday.
I am tempted.
Yeah.
So
good.
Thank you so much.
My work here's done.